law in and of itself is this standard from God that says you are creature, not creator.
Exactly.
And you will find freedom in being a creature. But freedom won't be found in claiming that you're God. Okay? And that's really what people want. When they say don't legislate morality, it's underneath I want to be Yahweh.
Right.
And if you were Yahweh, that'd be great. It would work.
Yeah.
Problem is, like, you're not.
The rallying cry of modern tolerance. Excuse me, but you can't impose your morality on other people. We've all heard this one, haven't we? And if you're the type of Christian who still believes in such antiquated notions as the sanctity of life, that sex belongs within marriage, that socialism is just theft with an academic twist, that women should be homemakers, and that nations ought to bow the knee to Christ, well, then you've probably had the pleasure of meeting today's new morality police. Yes, those zealous arbiters of freedom who will ironically shame you for imposing your beliefs while masked up, fists clenched, and dutifully parroting the latest decrees from the woke high command. Here we have gaslighting at its finest. They'll tell you that imposing morality is the ultimate unloving act, except, of course, when they're doing it. Because apparently imposing their secular creed is a selfless, enlightened endeavor. Meanwhile, the real crime, as they see it, is the Christian imposition, the one thing preventing them from reshaping the world as their playground of self-indulgence and ideological chaos. So naturally, we're faced with a bewildering question. Could a God of love really force anyone to do something they don't want to do? What happened to free choice and individual liberty, the usual buzzwords of modern dogma? And at the word choice, 1,000 feminists cry, amen. Many believe that law rests on some sort of neutral territory, that it's forged in the halls of diplomacy and refined with a delicate touch of humanism. But scratch the surface and it becomes clear that neutrality is as fictional as their supposed tolerance. Our age will gladly impose laws on the public, provided they aren't Christian, because if there's one thing secularism can't tolerate, it's a morality rooted in truth. Christianity, as it turns out, is the one force that bars mankind's desperate desire to live comfortably by lies, delusions, and moral relativism. To discuss this myth of neutral law and the inevitability of legislative morality, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Jared Longshore. Now, let me tell you, this is a man with perhaps the most iconic Southern accent in the Pacific Northwest, if not the whole country. Jared is a pastor, professor, and cultural commentator, and a man who's as comfortable talking Christendom over coffee as he is debunking modern myths with the charm of a Southern gentleman and the incisiveness of a steel trap. Dr. Longshore is no stranger to controversy, or to cutting through the nonsense to expose truth. Today, he's here to help us understand why the only real choice isn't whether to legislate morality, but rather whose morality will prevail. Jared Longshore, my dear friend, welcome back to Of Flames and Crowns.
Oh, I'm so glad to be back. Thanks for having me, Lennox.
Yeah. In my opening monologue, I said quite a bit there. Mm-hmm. Of course, the premise of much of this is around legislated morality. Can we really impose morality on a people? When you hear this line of thought, what's your response generally? What do you try to hit at?
Yeah, abundant confusion is my yeah. I mean, it's really strange. Like, where could this idea even arise from? That when any civil authority gives you a standard, they are not legislating morality. Clearly, this isn't a problem that people in the pre-modern era had.
Right.
They couldn't even conceive of this notion that my morality is to live over here in this particular world, and whatever civil authorities say, whatever they require of me, that they back up with the sword. They will punish me. Like they will put me in handcuffs.
Yes.
They will take me down to the county jail.
Right.
But when they do, don't think it's a matter of morality. It's morality's over here in this other realm.
Right.
What I want is a state that will establish standards that have nothing to do with morality, that will be enforced by penalty.
Right.
It's really crazy on its face.
Yeah, exactly. Where do you think this comes from? Why has this become such a popular idea?
I think it's just a way people lie. They want to lie to your face.
Yeah.
It's people that want to go about whatever it is that they want to do. So they want to have their own system. And the trouble's not. So you have the radical left that would create this idea. But really, it's kind of like a soft, juicy American evangelical that has bought into this kind of system of thinking. And that's where the trouble is. Yeah. I also think I'm glad that we're talking about this topic today because I think this is the kind of bad idea that is collapsing. So you have certain bad ideas that are like Goliath. I'm going to go have to slay this thing, and everyone and their mother actually believes this. This particular, don't legislate morality bad idea is one that several people have believed for a long time, but it's crumbling, like it's starting to go, particularly because you have the radical left that has now been around, at least just if you marked Obama's presidency. Yeah. You have, when you put Brutus in the bathroom with our daughters, we know that's a morality thing. Yeah. And if you're trying to say, no, but we want to live in a society where just anyone can use the girls' bathroom anytime they want. We're not trying to legislate morality. We're trying to do it in the name of freedom. We know it's immoral. We know it's insane. Right. So you have the likes of, Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump, Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk, all of these.
Jared Longshore.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to be in the presidential cabinet, but you have this very interesting moment where all of these normal people are saying we've descended into chaos, and they just want a sense of normalcy. Right. So most American Christians are realizing that this was just a lie from the left, and they shouldn't have believed it as long as they did. Right. God has given us standards and whatever you're going to do in that civil realm is going to require that people act in a certain way, which is going to concern right and wrong.
Yeah. Another common idea I come across very often is this idea that a sort of neutral world is what gives rise to true freedom. How do you respond to something like that? How do you respond to claims of neutrality as what enables something like freedom? So people then would argue that Christianity would be then a threat to freedom because you're imposing something on people which is inherently evil, because imposition is seen as the great evil and the great threat to freedom. How do you respond to something like that?
You got to do a lot of backhoe work with people that have bought into that and say, what does Christianity teach about the nature of freedom? So you go proof text. Jesus says, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Yeah. So you're slaves to sin. And you need to be liberated from sin's tyranny. Pharaoh in the Bible is an example of this, right? They're the people of God being tyrannized by Pharaoh. God comes and he liberates them. But when he does, you have to keep reading in the book of Exodus, right? So you read about these 10 plagues that he put upon Pharaoh in Egypt. He brings his people out and you say, wonderful, we have been liberated. And then God says, I'm the God that brought you out of the land of Egypt, and here are my 10 words, right? You say, whoa, what's this? Another tyrant, in one sense, if you take that narrative, while the Ten Commandments were still binding in the desert even before God handed them down, though they're just, we can see penalties for violations of those standards even before God wrote them with his finger on tablets of stone.
Right.
But you could still have this idea that between deliverance from Egypt and the 10 words on the Mount, let's take that as neutral. Okay, it wasn't, but you can see it in the story. Like, okay, well, what's that? What's neutral world? It's dying in the desert. Like that's what they did. What I want to do is wander in the desert with no food. And I want the ground to open up like it did and swallow up people that are in rebellion. You see, that's not freedom. That's the abyss. That's death. You don't want a world in which there are no standards. So that would be your neutral world setup. And of course, we reject that as an actual category that anyone could live in. Your choices are Pharaoh or Yahweh. Those are your choices. And you're going to find that's the way it always works. I remember a lot of this was present when I was like this neutral world was present when I was growing up, when I was young, and all of it being kind of seeded just in the culture and education and things that you'd see on television. But I remember even as a young kid how it was a lie. I remember they were like, kind of like, follow your own heart. And I was like, but if I go and eat all of the cookies,
you're going to have a problem with that.
I keep discovering that people, I am prohibited from doing this kind of thing. If I drive too fast on Main Street, people are always stopping me. At the same time, they're seeding me this idea that I can really go my own way. You know what I mean? And did I hurt someone else because I ate the cookies? Did I hurt someone else that I was driving 45 instead of 25? And I was like, I'm not even hurting anybody, but people are still, putting these standards on me. So the whole the worldview was broken the way we understand it. So you have to go back and say, what is the definition of liberty? And the Christian's going to say it's being set free from the tyranny of your sin.
Absolutely.
How do we fall under that tyranny? We fell under that tyranny because our first father transgressed the command, right? And thus we realize that even in the pre-fallen state, there was law.
There was
law.
Yeah.
And but it was an abundant. There was an abundance of freedom.
Yeah.
Eat of all of these trees of the garden. Enjoy them all.
Right.
But there's this one that you cannot partake of. And in the day that you do it, you'll die. God set up that arrangement. And if you game that out, I mean, this is like the deep theological structure underneath the question, but it's the only place I know to go to help people, is say, there was nothing inherently evil about that tree.
Right.
Okay? Everything God made was good.
Yes.
So, but God put a prohibition on that we would trust him.
Yeah.
That we would remember we are not him. So law in and of itself is this standard from God that says you are creature, not creator.
Exactly.
And you will find freedom in being a creature. But freedom won't be found in claiming that you're God. Okay? And that's really what people want. When they say don't legislate morality, it's underneath the I want to be Yahweh.
Right.
And if you were Yahweh, that'd be great. It would work.
Yeah.
Problem is, like, you're not. So you're a creature. You are bounded. You are limited. I don't know if I told this story last time I was with you. I told about the little football team that.
You can say it again.
Did I?
I don't know. Yeah.
I showed up at this like middle school.
Yeah.
Pipsqueak football team, and they had developed the year before this group, when I wasn't around, this little chant. They would all get together and say, "No limits."
Yeah.
And I said, well, I got to break it to you guys. Like, you're nothing but limited.
Right.
All right? You're limited in height.
Right.
You are limited in weight.
Yeah.
You are limited in mental capacity. You are limited by your skin. You can't actually get outside of it. You're a bounded creature. Right. You're finite. Yeah. And that all of that's undergirding the don't legislate morality. It's all just a play.
Yeah.
So not whether but which, of course, is the myth of neutrality. But I think underneath of it is I want to strip my life from that story that God has placed me in. He's put you in a story of the garden. He's put you in a story of the fall.
Yeah.
And standards were before the fall, and there's standards after the fall, and you can't think of them as these things that are keeping you from being the real you, right? As if law is to be artificially imposed, and there are legislators who want to artificially impose standards upon you, put a mask on your face if you're perfectly healthy,
right?
And those, we don't want to reject those by saying you shouldn't legislate morality. We reject those by saying you're supposed to legislate morality. Okay?
Yes.
You're supposed to have a standard that is governing your human standard, your civil standard. Okay? And therefore you have to say, well, what is the nature of that standard? Secular man is nervous about that because they're always like, whose standard? Whose standard is supposed to be behind?
Right.
You know? And it used to be the will of the people. That was like secular humanism.
Right.
All right. You can kind of Rousseau's social contract. All the people come together and we'll tell the authorities what we want our
democracy.
Yeah. And I do think we're still. This is where this gets creepy, man. Yeah. We still have that problem. It's easy to look at this most recent election and people say, "Oh, this is a mandate, right? This is a red wave because people are unsatisfied with the way things are." And I totally agree. That's all true.
Yeah.
And it's easy to step into the leadership role now and say, I'm going to do what the majority want to do because the majority actually don't like the direction we're going.
Right.
And the majority are right about all of that.
Yeah.
But if you are still operating on vox populi, vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God. And it just so happens at this juncture, everybody wants to have a moment of sanity. Like there's a moment that even the guy that's like on a bender, you know, like he's high off of his mind, and there's a moment at which he's like, "This is bad. I want to take a break."
Yeah,
and he'll go for 3 days a week where he's not going head over heels, and that's kind of like our society at the moment. That's great, but have you found Jesus? Is the question. Like, has our society decided that we're going to legislate standards that are based upon the standards that God has revealed to us? And we haven't done that yet. I think Christians need to fill that space and fill it loudly at this juncture because we are going to find some more stability for which we should be thankful. But we still have to make sure that we go, and you need to legislate morality.
Yeah. I want to sort of play devil's advocate here a little bit. On one hand, people might say something like, "Well, you know, we love Jesus. We want to obey him. But what about free will, Jared? What about free will? Doesn't that come into play at all here? When we start talking about imposing morality, what we're really saying is that man doesn't have the capacity to choose and even choose God. And how might that hurt our evangelism?" Special shout out to our Arminian friends watching this. But how do you respond to something like that?
Oh, there's at least two ways.
Yeah.
I mean, if the objection is, I want to obey Jesus, but what about free will? It sounds like to me that person's saying, I want to follow Jesus, but other people have a right not to. So I don't want to impose them. And I'm like, well, like, we just got to welcome you to the faith called Christianity, which doesn't actually permit that. So every knee has an obligation to bow to Jesus Christ. So if our interlocutor here is saying, I think we live in a world in which it's up to the individual as to whether he serves Jesus or not. And I'd say, well, then what's hell going to be about? What's that about?
Yeah.
Again, it's like me as a little kid. It's like, that's not really a choice. You told me I could eat all the cookies I want or not, and you made it sound like there would be no penalties. Like there was no standard governing me. and now I find out I can eat all the cookies and go to hell. Is that what you're telling me? And then Christians are going to go, yeah. So if you're a Christian and you believe that if you believe that you don't salute Jesus, if you don't trust and obey Jesus, then you're going to die and go to hell. Then don't pretend that you don't believe that. It's what you actually hold to. So I think that's one line. The other line might be, aren't people free to choose God? And this is where our real, I'm a Reformed Calvinistic guy, and there's plenty of Christians out there that don't think like this. But we get confused about what free will actually is. So I've walked into classrooms before and asked students just off the cuff, do you believe that every man is free to love God from the heart or not? I've had all the hands shoot up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, congratulations, you're all Pelagian, which is a heresy. It's marked as a heresy of the church, not just by like Calvinistic people. This is, of course, back in Augustine's day.
Exactly.
So we've got centuries and centuries of centuries from the 5th century on that this is marked as not in step with Christian orthodoxy.
Right.
And then you realize, okay, you can't understand like freedom of the will without putting it in its covenantal context. If you just walk in, if you go, but I'll ask them also, does that individual man have free will? And they'll try to like game it out. Do you have free will? You can only understand the question in the covenantal context, meaning Adam, when God made Adam, he made him upright and he made him with a free will. Yeah. Like he had free will. Okay. And then somebody's going to go, does that mean you're Arminian? Well, no, it means I'm talking about before the fall.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Because man's always ruled by what masters him.
Yeah.
Right? Like he's always governed by what he worships.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So then this idea of neutrality goes right out of the window, right? Because there is no such thing as man in the void. Yeah. There is no such thing as man without a master. You have a master. Yeah. It's either the prince of the air, the power of the air, it's the enemy, or it's Christ. Yes. But Adam had this free will with which he could love and obey God and with which he could disobey God. And he did. Our first father, Adam, disobeyed at the tree. And when he did, there was a genuine death. Okay, now he didn't physically fall to the ground at that moment, turn back to dust. That happened eventually. But there was a genuine spiritual death that took place. Okay? This is Christian teaching, you know. And then you say, okay, well, maybe when he has a son, he'll come out free will again, and he'll have his own individual choice as whether to love God or not love God. And the answer is, nope, that's not how it works. You say, what kind of world am I living in? I thought I lived in the land of the free and the home of the brave and individual rights and liberties. Right. Are you meaning to tell me that Adam, our first father, sinned to the tree in such a way that his son came out lacking what his father had, which was free will? Yeah. And I'm going, that's the game. Yeah. Like that's the game that God's playing. That's the arrangement he set upon us. That's what we call that the covenant of life with Adam. Some call it the covenant of works. But when that son comes, okay, Cain and Abel both, okay, they are depraved in their will, and they themselves cannot choose to freely love God. Yeah. They can't do it. Yeah. Because of their father's sin. Yes. Now, if you say, well, I don't think that's just, what I would like to point out here to a lot of the Calvinistic world is, well, when somebody thinks it's inherently unjust that we are born totally depraved, unable to love God, we should point out that our first father wasn't born that way. Well, it wasn't created that way. Right. People have a point. There is something instinctive in humans that don't like that idea. Yeah. Okay. And I want to make sure that they're disagreeing with a real thing and not disagreeing with the wrong thing. It's wrong to say that God created a world splattered with a bunch of individuals and they were all just dead. Right. That's not the world he made. Right. He made one man. Yeah. He made him upright. Yeah. and he had a free will, but he has connected us to him such. He is our Father such, and God put him in a covenant such that when he fell, his will now was fallen and couldn't love God, and every single offspring is in that condition. Now, when God, by his grace, we believe in grace and mercy, and God sends his Spirit upon us. And you have this, of course, in Ezekiel's Valley of the Dry Bones. Can these dry bones live? They're dead. They can't. They're not going to. Dry bones, a bunch of skeletons aren't going to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps. But Ezekiel says, God, you know.
Right.
Okay. And God does that work for Christians. They are born again. They're made alive. And now they have a free will. Okay. So you and I, Christians, and all the other Christians out there, actually have a free will. One, again, that can love God again. But we believe that everyone who's outside of Christianity is actually still dead and dead in their sin. So, I mean, if you want freedom, categorically, freedom is found in Christ. If the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. But you will find that freedom is, again, not categorically the removal of law. It's a removal of your depravity. It's a removal of the death that is now upon you. But you'll find that the law is still sitting there waving at you. What used to condemn you now is the way your standards for living that free life.
That kind of goes into another question I wanted to ask here about, which refers to people who kind of pit law against grace. Like they kind of get nervous when you start talking about legislating morality, because their concern is, well, you know, law's not going to change people's hearts. That's something only the gospel can do. So, you know, points for being so passionate about the gospel. But what do they get wrong there?
Yeah. Well, first they get Psalm 19 wrong. The law is perfect, converting the soul. I mean, that just throws every gospel-centered person over the last 15 years. So yeah, law. We have all sorts of law grace problems. And that is arising from dispensationalism in America. That's what it is. At the end of the day, it's like a certain way of thinking about the Old Testament, that they indeed are not the people of God, that somehow God saved them in a different way than he saved us. And that's evident because of how doom and gloom everything was at Mount Sinai particularly. I think Galatians 4 is huge here, where God talks about Sarah and Hagar, these two women, both belonging to Abraham. One was a free woman, one was a slave woman. Sarah's the free woman, Hagar is the slave woman. And he explicitly says they refer to two covenants. So Hagar is a slave woman, and she referred to Jerusalem at the time that Paul was writing. And Sarah is the Jerusalem that's above, and she is free. Now, because Hagar also refers to Mount Sinai and the Jerusalem that then was. And people look back at Mount Sinai and think, well, yeah, if you touched the mountain, you died. If your beast touched the mountain, you died. There was smoke. People were afraid to even come near. So that must be the law stuff. Okay. And the Bible says the law came through Moses and grace and truth came through Christ. And thus, if I'm with Christ, then I can't be with Moses. If I'm with Christ, then I can't be with the law. If I'm with the liberty, I can't be with the Ten Commandments. So stop legislating morality because we're Christians, gospel people. And I would say, no, you made an error. So let's go back to Hagar and figure out what she is. Is she really this covenant of condemnation? Was there no salvation within that particular covenant when God dealt with his people? The first problem you have is if you look at Exodus 20, God says, I am the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, therefore keep my law. So he's already delivered them. That's at Mount Sinai. And Exodus 19, he says, you're going to be a kingdom of priests. Now that flavors it differently, doesn't it? If he literally saved a people, he's got these people that he delivered, and he puts his name on them, and he says, "I'm your God, you're my people, you're going to be a kingdom of priests on the earth. You're actually going to be used to reconcile other people to God."
Right.
And then with that principle, a lot of doom and a lot of threats and a lot of like blessings and curses I set before you. That sounds like God graciously dealing with a people, saving a people, but they are in an old school slavery-like form. You can belong to God as slaves. He also says in that same book in Galatians that they were like an immature child. They needed a schoolmarm. My little 4-year-olds like need the lady that's slapping their wrists,
right?
And making sure that they do their Latin lessons. But the key is, Hagar was the covenant of grace in its old form. God was saving his people even with the law.
Right.
And then that comes into Sarah, the new covenant. Now you're free, and the law's been written on your heart. Right? Now you have this kind of principle, which is what the application of that is. The law didn't go away, but the law has now been written on the heart of the people, which means what you're going to find in Christian societies is that they're generally going to keep the standard. Like you're going to find that they're the best citizens that you have.
Yeah.
They're not going to be citizens that hate law, but the law's written on their heart. How would I hate it? I don't hate it.
Exactly. They love the standard.
Right. But you're also going to find that means if you're in a society that is not Christian, well, then you're probably going to need to crack the whip. Like you're going to need to.
Right.
But you have law in the society that is debauched, and you have law in the society that is Christian. You're still going to have civil standards, but you're going to find that those can be mapped in different ways as Christianity kind of does its work.
Yeah. Another passage that comes to mind for me right now is Matthew 28, the Great Commission. Interesting how in discipling the nations, there's a reference to teaching them to do all that was commanded, right? What does that look like exactly?
So in our context, Church in America has reduced that Great Commission of Matthew 28 to just go make converts.
Exactly.
So get people to walk an aisle, say a prayer, be baptized.
Yeah.
And then we'll go get more to do that. And we cut out that whole back end.
Yeah.
So to say we're going to teach the nation, which is actually teach an ethne there is nations, which is another complexity in this situation. But first is just that your duty, if you're actually going to disciple the world and the people in it, is they're going to have to obey things.
Yeah.
Like we've shown up to teach you to obey.
Yeah.
And immediately they're like, this is jihad. Immediately like, this is Sharia law, because they feel the force. And if you, there's if you're going to go to secular societies, people that believe this, stop legislating morality, in some sense, you just have to lean into it because you're not going to like soft pedal this with them. If that text says that your job is to teach them to obey, you can't back down on the obedience part.
Right.
You just like, we're absolutely here to teach people to obey the standard.
Yeah.
Right. And showing them that they're obeying a standard already that's a faulty standard, that's a corrupt standard, that's corrupting them. That's one way to help them see. All right. What we're telling you, this obedience is going to be life.
Yeah.
And this obedience also must arise from a heart of faith. There's an old Christian hymn, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. This is the way.
Yeah.
And we don't want some simple external obedience standard. That's not what we're actually promoting.
Right.
That's what in some sense, that's what the secularists want. Like they just want, let's not make our society Christian.
Yeah.
Let's just kind of all contract to externally agree.
Yeah.
I just want you to externally be a decent neighbor. I don't want you to really love your neighbor. I just want you to stay off my lawn.
Right.
I'll stay off your lawn.
Right.
And there's people that are happy with that. Well, that's not That's not it. That would be great, and I understand why people kind of want that right now.
Yeah.
But this is this is like a through and through. We trust the Lord, and therefore we obey the Lord. And then He tells us to love the other people that are around us in genuine fashion.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to hit something interesting just based on something you said. Assuming you'd have a critique of libertarianism.
Okay, that'd be a good assumption.
Yeah. What do they get wrong with this? I suppose, like, on face value for me, it's that they don't have a standard by which they can even determine why they should be left alone and why they should be free. What would you want a typical libertarian, a classic libertarian, to understand as we think about legislated morality?
Yeah, there's the fundamental problem is like a rabid individualism. Okay, that claims I'm not in any kind of bonded entities. Okay, so in philosophy of the one and the many, you are an individual and I am an individual, and yet we are both husbands to wives, and we both have children, and our wives have our last names, and our children have our last names. And you're like, well, what's that about? The libertarian wants to reject the last name entirely. The libertarian says, I want to live in a world of first names. Okay.
Good illustration. And that's a great analogy.
And, just make sure that your first name doesn't bump into my first name and my first name doesn't bump into your first name. And I want to say, here's the fundamental problem is that is not the world that God created. It's the matrix. You're living in the matrix.
Yes.
It's like objectively not true.
Yes.
And therefore, it's not going to work as a foundation from which you would establish human law in society.
Yes.
It's not going to work, and it's going to corrupt people. So you have to realize that the world you live in is a world of last names, and that interestingly, this sets us apart from the angels. Okay, in some sense, I might say the angels are going to be like libertarian, worshipers of God.
Right.
Okay, because when God created them, he just created them like there they were on the whiteboard, a bunch of dots on the whiteboard, all different kinds and all of that. But that's not how He did it with our race. With our race, He gave us all one dad.
Yeah.
And then He gave not only similar traits, like physical traits, but again, we go back to the thing I was talking about earlier. The depravity of man is something that happened. It was a covenantal depravity that came upon us. And then there are covenantal duties that are also incumbent upon us. And it's not just, those duties are not just duties that I as an individual have toward another individual. Well, since you're another individual, I need to love you, care for you, protect you, whatever. No. It's like Scripture tells us that when the husband loves his wife, he loves his own body. You go like, well, what's that about? Like, that's a whole different way of thinking. Right. It's like when people come in for marriage counseling, is it a him problem or her problem? Well, again, there's a truth there because you could just have a situation where one of them are being particularly naughty.
Right.
But I'm like, what do you mean? Well, you're saying is it a head problem or a body problem? Like you're one thing. So we've got, until we recover that framework, you're going to have this kind of libertarian tendency. We have to understand covenant, and once you have covenant in the family, so you can kind of get it in the family. Christians still understand it in the family.
Right.
Then you start talking about covenantal loyalties on a larger scale. You have obviously the Church of God being the clearest one, but I'm an advocate for recovering a covenantal nation. Okay, and there's a great history with this. It's not like it's a novel idea.
I mean, just one way I can think of it is libertarians didn't build America. Covenant theologians did.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I mean, we're historically Protestant nation.
Absolutely.
There's no denying it.
Yeah.
You can not like it if you want to, but you have to deal with the history.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Protestant political thought, particularly, had no conception of a civil magistrate that wasn't swearing allegiance to Jesus.
Yes.
Like there was no place for that.
Yeah.
And even to the degree that people want to talk about the natural law was never proposed as an alternative to saluting Jesus.
Amen. Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So that means that we as a people are yoked, and this is related not only to our laws, but like when should we be going to war? Samuel Rutherford wrote Lex Rex, and he's gaming out at one instance whether to help a neighboring nation in their civil war. You know, should we go and assist? Okay, it's like same questions we're having: Ukraine, Russia,
Israel, Palestine,
all of that. And Rutherford couldn't answer that question without thinking about duties to other Christian nations and the duty of protecting the church, like protecting Christendom.
Yeah.
Like, and now I think this is going to be. I've got a heavy lift here.
Yeah.
I talked about finding. Now this is a Goliath that I'm going to have to. There's lots of Christian good guys out there that would be like, take it easy, man. We just need the oil rights, and we need to make sure we do what's best for America first and whatnot. And yes to all of that.
Yeah.
But again, this is my point earlier. As we're gaining ground on all of those normal fronts, we have to actually rebuild the foundations. We have to understand what's going on here. This is a right way of thinking. If you are not covenanted with God, okay, and I would just add here as an aside, this shouldn't stress anybody out too much.
Yeah.
In God we trust on our money, in God we trust on our buildings. We're called a Christian nation, and our Supreme Court legislations, of course.
Right.
Our whole heritage is God bless America.
Exactly.
And everyone knows that we're not talking about a law.
Right.
Okay? We just know we're not. Walk down any street and you're still going to find the cathedrals.
Yeah.
You're still going to find the chapels. And I'm saying that actually has a play in how we operate on our with our legislation and in our international policy, right? Foreign policy is going to be governed by this. And that doesn't mean that if some random Christian nation all the way across the world that we have no kind of affinity with or history with is doing something dumb, we're going to back them.
Right.
I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
But you actually want legislators and governors, president, all of that are thinking in this category. Right. I've sworn allegiance to Jesus. Right. I've sworn allegiance to protect the Christian church. Yeah. We're going to be establishing laws that are in accordance with those allegiances, not contrary to them.
Right. Another way I can actually think about this idea of just international policy is every realm belongs to Christ, right? And we should be seeking to help people acknowledge that that's true, right? And as best as we can. If you were given an opportunity, I hope this is not going to be hypothetical for long, Jared, but let's say a certain orange fellow in the White House gives you a call and says, Jared, we're going to make America great again.
All right, very good. So sounds good.
And he wanted you to speak to very specific policies. And he kind of gave you this wish list of 5 things you could absolutely influence with your Christian faith. What would those 5 things be?
5 things.
5 things.
The first is we have to overturn Obergefell.
Yes.
Now, when it comes to the best manner in which to do these things, I would leave that to those who are in the civil realm. I'll make clear to everyone I'm an ecclesiastical authority. Right. I'm not a civil authority. Right. And I don't want to be. I don't want to, when it comes to discussing what needs to be done, that's the kind of things that should happen in a given society.
Yeah. When
it comes to best policies for actually accomplishing that, I leave that to others.
Right.
But Obergefell is tactical because it's foolish on its face, and it's like we just know those two those two creatures,
Yeah.
created in the image of God, can't reproduce, and the reproduction is an essential directive of marriage itself. Yeah. It was established for that particular purpose. You cannot fulfill that purpose. You can't be in that kind of union. So a second would be, I'd go for a Burgerfell. A second would be going back and getting rid of no-fault divorce. So the first move is like a Burgerfell is practical, but then you have to go back and get it. We need to live in a society in which a man comes and says to the local, usually it's going to be at a county level authorities, I'm going to put away my wife. And the civil authorities at the county level are going to say, why? And he's going to say, because she burnt the biscuits. And the civil authorities are going to look at him and say, well, you can't put her away. Go back and continue to
enjoy those biscuits.
Like you categorically cannot do it. You just can't do it. And that would shock us because of no-fault divorce law. I think it was made 1970s, so it's not that far back.
No, it's not.
We need to go and get that. Third, and this isn't in order of importance. Order of importance would be abortion. So we have to go. We have to outlaw it. It has to be eradicated from the land. That has to be done in a wise way. Again, I'm not talking about. You're going to have to figure out as a good king, what's it going to look like with this corrupt people, with the level of corruption that we've reached with abortion. How am I actually going to change it? But you have to. I mean, it has to be measures eradicating it, outlawing it, criminalizing it, penalizing it, go for the abortion doctors, whoever would be involved, that kind of thing. Fourth, I would go for artificial reproductive technologies. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is one that I think, my sense is that the movement is in favor of this idea. This is another big Goliath that it's going to take a lot of Christians in America time to get their head around because they've bought into this idea of artificial reproductive technologies. I actually have two students at NSA right now that are writing. They're both writing a thesis on artificial reproductive technologies, and they're both taking the route that it's immoral and it's not a valid option, even in the cases where you only fertilize one egg and you have a successful implantation. Like even in those, because most people are going to say, well, yeah, if you're killing off children when you do this, you can't do it. But what about that one? Like, can we do it? In this one, can we do in vitro, which would be in the dish? Can we fertilize the egg and can we implant it? And if we did it that way, would it be moral? And they're arguing that it would not be. Okay. And mainly because you're stripping the production of life from God's created design. And God actually has created the context in which that is to happen. In the secret place, you knit me together in my mother's womb. The Lord opens and closes the womb. All of those kind of arguments, and there's a heavy lift there. If people are listening, I would say I probably would have to do a lot more work to convince people, and I understand that. But we need to definitely be having the conversation.
It's an important conversation.
And if you go, man, we have. I don't know I think I don't know if it's 1 million embryos in freezers. I looked it up a while back. You want to talk about creepy levels, Orwellian, that hideous strength. We're like in the book that Lewis wrote.
That would be it.
And that's giving people a chance to go. And the same thing with a Burgerfell. So you point to the embryos and you point to reducing life to some kind of commodity that we're going to purchase, and we're going to flip through, we're going to flip through books and look at random sperm donors to figure out what kind of product we want to get. Like you're going to the grocery store and finding out how many plums you want to grab from the aisle. Like you've reduced them to this. And this is in our own lingo as Christians. How many children are you going to have? Actually, I'm dropping an article tomorrow about how many children to have, and that's I want to point out that we should be very wary of having modern assumptions when it comes to that. Okay? I'm not anti-family planning. Of course, I'm anti anything that's in abortive fashion, but I'm not against the idea of like, well, we need to think about, we have a part to play.
Yeah.
But if you ever think that means like, again, I am God and I open and close the womb, no way. So I think IVF.
Man, we should do another whole podcast and episode on this as well at some point. But yeah, I'd love that.
And then fifth is the immigration thing. We have to actually know what it means to be an American.
Right.
We have all of these illegals in the country, and they really do have to go. You're going to have to figure out where you would draw the line. But there are going to be practical, tangible actions to take in order to accomplish that. And you've got to figure out how it's supposed to be done in the right way. What kind of allegiances do you have to have, and what kind of standards do you have to meet in order to be a part of this country? But and this is kind of the covenantal idea coming through. We're recovering the idea that our nation really is a thing. If you cut it off from God entirely, well, what makes it up? Maybe it's because we look like each other. Maybe we have the same skin color. Maybe we have our fathers fought in the same war. Right. You could come up with language. You could come up with a lot of things, and language. Not all these things are going to be bad. Language would be a good kind of standard of some degree, right? But you're going to have to actually recover a national identity, and I'm saying that can't be done outside of covenant. Or if you try to do it outside of covenant, you're going to do it in a stupid way, right? You're going to make faulty standards. Yeah. You didn't ask for 6, but I'd go ahead and say we've got to destroy the administrative state. So put this on another and I don't know how much Elon and Vivek could do. Yeah. But I'm quite hopeful that they're going to do a lot.
And I'm glad they're trying.
I just saw chatter that's like, well, it's not a governmental entity, and you're still going to have the problem of like the Senate and the House having to confirm everything, and they're probably not for these various reasons. So, again, I don't know all the details, but that's a good step in the right direction of saying you actually have to put some sunsets on the various bureaucracies that exist that are not elected. Just say, okay, well, you can exist for another 6 months, and you can exist for a year. And, there's a way to do it.
I think their mandate actually had a time limit. I think July 2026.
Okay.
The Department of Government Efficiency should officially shut down. I think that's actually in the stipulation.
Okay.
So their goal is to get to work and shut themselves down.
There you go.
Which is, that's good. I love that. Jared, do you believe in theocracy?
It depends on what somebody means by a theocracy.
If you were to use the term, how would you define it?
Well, let's say the thing that I'm aiming for, the best language that I can come up with is Christian nation. So I want to use Christian nation.
Right.
We've had Christian nationalism, of course, and there's people that are debating over the propriety of the word nationalism and what that entails. Christian nation, covenant Christian nation. And what I mean by that, the thing I first want to say is it has nothing to do with ecclesiastical authorities legislating civil standards. Okay, so we have civil authorities that do that kind of business, and we have ecclesiastical authorities that hold the keys of the kingdom. And let's say that you became the governor of Idaho. Okay. You're a civil authority. I'm a minister of word and sacrament. I'm a Christian minister. I have the keys of the kingdom, which means preaching of the gospel and administering the sacraments. And you, as a civil authority, are not allowed to do that. So you don't hold the keys of the kingdom. And I, as a ecclesiastical authority, don't hold the sword. I cannot punish people for crimes.
Exactly.
That's your job, and that's my job. And they're related. So even I, as one of those ecclesiastical authorities, if I'm out running amok at night, if I'm out here getting drunk and driving into buildings, you have every right to come to the ecclesiastical authority. So you got to go down to the county jail. This is where you're going to go. And in turn, if you, as a servant of Christ, Romans 13, as a minister of Christ, but in the civil realm, were to say, I'm going to leave my wife, I'm going after all these other women, and I'm not repenting of what I've done, and commend you to repent, all this stuff. You say, we're not. The ecclesiastical authority has the right to excommunicate you from the Christian church, which in my arrangement would put you out of being able to
even be in office
anymore.
Exactly.
So those offices, and that's in step with what we have been as a nation, or let's say what states have been like in the past. So there's this interwoven deal, but we have our jurisdictions and we hold them.
Right.
Okay. So that's a picture of a particular nation and, of course, particular states and towns that have actually gone into covenant with God. This is how we're going to honor the Lord Jesus Christ as King.
Yeah.
And that means our civil magistrates have those duties and ecclesiasticals have their duties.
Yeah, I love that. Jared, it's always an honor getting to spend time with you.
Yes.
Talk through these. I have to find another reason to get you in here. I think we've got so much more to discuss.
Yeah.
But I think this was very helpful. And if there's one thing I think I want people to go away with, it's just one, I think appreciating the importance of the sovereignty of God and understanding that he actually has a law that's good. It's good for nations. And nations would be blessed for bowing the knee to him. Yeah.
Yeah. John Lennon was wrong. If you imagine there's no heaven and no hell below us, you will not have the world living as one.
Exactly.
You actually have to have those standards are present.
Yeah.
And that's where actually the blessing is going to come, is by acknowledging that we have good laws and we understand that we're under authority, and freedom is found in that vein, not in imagining that those laws aren't there.
Exactly. Well, God bless you, Jared. Thank you so much.